Thanks for tuning in for another episode of our 2021 e-bike shootout. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the Kona Remote 160 DL. The Remote is a bike that did quite well in last year's e-bike shootout when we went to Palm Springs, so we were really excited to see where some of the updates and improvements to this bike would stack up in St. George, Utah, as we put it against many other top performing e-bikes in the enduro category. This is a 160 millimeter front and rear bike. It weighs in at 55.4 pounds, and this build retails for $7,299. For 2021, the Kona Remote DL comes with a RockShox Zeb Select fork and a RockShox Super Deluxe Select rear shock. Upgrades from last year's suspension spec for sure, and something that we were really excited to see how it would just improve front end stiffness and confidence, and it did so absolutely. Moving on to the Shimano EP8 drive unit, Kona specs a 504 watt-hour battery. We wish it was a little bit bigger. We're big fans of more laps, and we are on that all boost all the time program. So unfortunately, you just can't do as many laps when you got a small battery. So moving on, we've got a SRAM Code R brake spec with 200 mil rotors, SRAM GX NX Eagle drivetrain, a little bit of a mix between shifter and derailleur. This is a 29er front and rear, and there is a Trans X dropper post rounding out the cockpit. Our size large test bike had some pretty capable geometry with a 467 mil reach, 635 stack height, 1,254 millimeter wheelbase. The shortest chainstay is on test at 435 millimeters and a 350 bottom bracket height. The seat tube angle sits at 74.9 degrees and the head tube is 64 degrees. So how did the Remote ride? Well, overall it rode very well.
This bike is really an all-around performer, I felt like. It climbs well, it descends confidently. It's the best feeling Zeb tune I think we've had.
Yep. Overall, for me, that bike just did everything well. It just did everything really
very quiet.
Just well.
Oh,
Super quiet.
I think it's someone that enjoys modulating terrain. So terrain that's going to go up and down, but then also they want to spend an hour and a half climbing to the top and just smash
And
down.
shred.
Yeah. It's a very balanced pack. I think that's what we talked about.
Yeah, it's the most balanced bike I think out of all the bikes.
Totally.
First, we'll get into some of the dislikes, areas that we would have liked to have seen improved on this bike. Dropper post. None of us were fans with the Trans X. It was problematic. Didn't love the lever actuation. It was just, dropper post, boom. 504 battery, talked about that a moment ago. We've said it with every bike in the shootout that had a 504 battery. We just like doing more laps. And when you have an e-bike, you want to do more laps and get more downhills in. When we got down to the bottom of a hill, when 4 out of the 5 riders could go back up for one more lap, and the guy on the 504 bike says, I'll just wait down here and eat a Twinkie, you don't want to be that guy. Twinkies are delicious, but they're not as delicious as getting one more lap in. So bigger batteries. So another little critique, not totally related to the dropper post, or the dropper post fault, we should say, is the cable routing for the dropper post. It was a little problematic depending on, just with the different height riders. We had to raise and lower that seat, and the way it kind of goes through that frame and bends to get up into that seat tube caused some issues that we had to kind of wrestle with to get it to be in its very small window of a happy zone. Otherwise it would actuate and pull too much tension on the cable and it would just drop or wouldn't come up. So we'd like to see a little bit of an improvement in that cable routing. One of the other critiques we had was that the bike felt a little bit tall, and I don't necessarily mean in the bottom bracket height, it just felt like it had a little bit of a higher center of gravity. And you know, we did a little bit of playing around with, you know, the steer tube spacers and getting the bars up or down. I think the seat tube on the bike was a little bit, possibly a little taller, but it just had a feel that it was higher. It just, the center of gravity didn't feel quite as low, and that was kind of our last real critique that some of our testers had, and that kind of came in quick direction changes, or if you're like mid corner and you want to, you know, change that turn a little bit, it just felt a little bit high and like it kind of wanted to stand up a touch. Now, what we liked about this bike, the suspension tune was awesome. It was definitely a bike that just like smoothed things out, right? In Utah, it was very rough. There's a lot of rock, loose and embedded, and when it came time to just kind of like test your metal and just let off the brakes and go over long sections of rock, it just felt like the back tire just conformed to the ground and it just ate everything up butter. It was great. So that was something a lot of our testers really liked about this bike. It has a soft, supple, and plush suspension tune, but not so much so that you're blowing through the travel, which was nice that they were able to blend kind of that progression and ramp up at the end with a really nice soft, supple feel off the top. Short chain stays, mostly we really liked that. It was probably one of the most fun bikes to kind of manual and play with. It made snapping the bike around corners really fun, especially in those dry, loose conditions. You know, just a quick little like flick of the hips or tap on the brake and you can get that back tire out and slide it around stuff. The bike is quiet. That was another thing that we really liked, was this thing, no rattles, not a lot of noise. You know, there's that little bit of that Shimano EP8 ratchet or kind of clutch ratcheting sound, which goes away once you really start going fast. It's kind of on that slower speed stuff that you can kind of notice it when you're coasting, but once you're up to speed, you can't hear it at all, and I don't think that's a huge deal. So no cable rattle, no bike rattle. It was a solid, stable machine, and really just made it feel even smoother because of that. So ideal consumer for the Kona Remote, I'd say pretty much anybody. Like, it's a solid bike all around. It's got a slightly high price for some of the spec and the small battery. We think that's definitely something that you're gonna have to justify, I guess, maybe if you're, you know, a Kona fan, or you know, the short chain stays or the really supple feel got you going, then you might be willing to pay a little extra. But Code R brakes and a 504 battery, those are definitely, you know, and the TransX dropper post, those are three things that kind of make it tough for us to swallow a $7,300 price tag. That being said, the rest of the bike performs very well. Playful, supple, stable at speed, really mutes out the terrain beneath you. So if you want a bike that you can just sit down, pedal over rough, bumpy, you know, roots or rocks, you want to turn around and float over those things on the way down, this is definitely a bike worth checking out. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel if you don't already. We are going to be putting this bike up in the roundtable discussion with the other 12 bikes from our 21 e-bike shootout. Thank you guys for watching. Stay tuned for more, and we'll see you out on the trails.